Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be joined by someone who has spent some time in law enforcement and can actually certainly open our eyes as to what that job specifically is. We see a lot of turmoil and unrest, and especially many people calling out and saying what we should be doing is defunding our police officers. But as people should be aware of, that thin blue line is a wonderful amount of protection that can afford us the ability to go about our day in a confident way, knowing that we can pursue our own happiness. But joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is author of the book Humane Policing: How Perspectives Can Influence Our Performance. What's interestingly is that he's covered a number of cases and arrested many individuals from a busy sheriff's office. Interesting enough, he had more than 90% of those that he had arrested who had thanked him. He offers life-changing tools for his fellow law enforcement colleagues called Humane Policing that can better serve their communities. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest and author of the book Policing, Darren Spencer. Darren, thank you for being on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Yes, thanks for having me on, Daniel.
You bet. Now, you got quite a record here when it comes to the 20 months that you had served, and unfortunately you had a debilitating condition that took you out of this career. But, 250 cases that resulted in 40 felony arrests, 74 misdemeanor arrests, wrote 57 warrantless arrest affidavits and 7 arrest warrants. I mean, that's quite a bit even for that short period of time. And as you say in your book, you tend to meet people, as a lot of officers do, when they're just having a bad day. And it's kind of rough that way, isn't it?
Yeah, I could never tell you exactly why it would always happen when I was on duty, but I was always inundated with cases. But I can tell you exactly how I was able to deal with people and gain their cooperation instead of requiring me to force them to comply with my commands.
I know. I remember years ago, I have a good friend of mine who had served in the Clackamas County Sheriff's Department, and after about 5 years, he finally said, I've had it. I'm going to go and find something else to do. But he had actually talked to me about a book, and I'm wondering if you're familiar with it, called Verbal Judo.
Yes, I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Anyway, the reason I brought that up is because I actually went out and I picked up the book, and it was about an officer that would talk about how when he would encounter people, that he would actually offer options. This is how this is going to turn out. And so it was sort of, that you had a choice. And that would tend to calm things down. But a lot of times people, don't tend to be too cooperative, especially if they're in a situation where they broke the law. So let's talk about how you came to write this book and follow the kind of philosophy that actually got a lot of people to actually kind of look at what you're doing with them in a positive way.
Certainly. When I was doing the job, I was getting better results than my counterparts. I was solving more cases, making more arrests, and gaining more cooperation than my fellow deputies. And at the time, I wouldn't have been able to tell you exactly why, because I would just tell you, like, well, I don't cut corners, and I do the job, and I do all the details. But it was when I became disabled and I was laid up in a bed 80% of my time where I actually had the time to go back and I retyped every report I ever did to refresh my memory on each individual report. And that's when I was able actually to analyze and break down exactly what I did, what worked, what didn't work, and why it worked.
Now let's go ahead and talk about what happened as you began to engage people in, situations where you found you were meeting people having a particular bad day.
Oh, certainly. And when dealing with people in law enforcement, whenever you show up to somebody's house especially, they're not happy to see you 95% of the time, and you face resentment immediately. And even though that you were called there to assist them. And so you have to take that resentment and redirect it to something else, and you have to get them to start talking about something other than why you're there, to kind of get their brain to reset that second to say, okay, this person's actually listening and talking. Because the old philosophy in law enforcement was ask them, tell them, make them. And it's a very flawed philosophy because you're in somebody's house. They're having a really bad day. They're having spouse issues, money issues, kid issues, all the above. And all they're trying to do is salvage some pride from the encounter and situation, because they're like, my life is really screwed up right now and I don't know what to do. That's why I'm called you, and you're not doing anything to help me. And when you reset people's mindset, a lot of times when I'd come in the door and I would encounter that harsh environment, I'd be like, I get it. You don't like cops. And I said, there's some cops I don't like. And I don't drive a big red shiny truck, implying I'm not a firefighter. And so that would kind of reset their mind a second to think about it. What I was saying, and just kind of break the tension in the room. And that's where a lot of officers and deputies make the mistake of then going into telling them what they're going to do next. Instead, what I would do is I would look around the room and find anything I could talk to this individual about other than why I was there, whether it be sports memorabilia, different vacations, anything I could see in their house that would give me something to start a short conversation on something other than why I was there, to get some sort of common theme and rapport going. And as soon as I do that, then I would go into, okay, what is the situation involving? And a lot of times it was domestic violence. And when I would deal with people, I would even act outside of my agency's policies and training guidelines. And the reason, let me clarify that, because that sounds negative, but it's really not. The policies and training guidelines are a department's guidelines. They're not set in stone. It's something they recommend you follow. But if you can think and articulate why you're taking a specific action, you're okay. And here in Colorado, we're a domestic violence state. So what that means is whenever I have any evidence a crime has been committed of domestic violence, I'm required by law to make a physical arrest. I have no discretion in the matter. Well, the training guidelines of my agency were, whenever you knew you were going to make an arrest of somebody, get them in handcuffs as soon as possible. And I adamantly disagreed with that. And they're like, well, how do you disagree with your officer safety? I said, you're right, it's my officer safety. I will dictate a scene the way I feel appropriate and what is best for my interest and the people I'm serving. And they didn't like that I was argumentative in their training approach, but they could never argue with my results. And how it would typically play out is I would say, okay, I get it. You're having a bad day. And you're having these issues. And I said, how do we move forward from these issues? How do we start to improve the situation? And most people understand they logically screwed up and there's consequences for those actions. And I'd say, my option to you is I would like to take you out to my car. I'll take custody of you out there because I don't want to further traumatize your family. I don't want your kids to see me put you in handcuffs. And almost everybody would be like, yes, absolutely. And there was a small percentage of people that had bad experience with law enforcement before. And they're like, oh, this guy's trying to trick me. And I'd be like, okay, I get it. You don't trust me? I said, that is what I want to happen because I think it is best for your family. I said, if you don't want to do that option, I will be forced to take custody of you here, and you'll be making the logical choice that I have to further traumatize your family in front of them. And if you take that option, I'm also then going to put child abuse on the charges because you're making a conscious decision to do it. And that would reset their brain again and say, oh, wait, this guy's actually trying to help me with the first step. And that's when they'd be like, no, absolutely, let's do option A.
Kind of like giving them some dignity, even though they're in an undignified position, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And as soon as they would understand that I actually took into consideration them and their family, that's when they could see me as a person doing a job and see past the resentment of the uniform. Mm-hmm. And that's when people would actually start to listen, and we could make progress.
Mm-hmm. You know, and it's so true, too, because I remember many years ago when I served in hospitality as a bartender, and it was pretty amazing what you would see some bartenders do. Believe it or not, a lot like some of the police officers that perhaps you knew and as a lot of people have had experience with, they would tend the bartenders to take a position of authority. Like, if you don't play my way, it's the highway situation. And a lot of times, and it's really difficult when people are drinking because they can become extremely irrational. And that's the last thing you want to do is combative or confrontational, because you're going to find yourself in more problems than you really want to deal with. And I always found, and it was so true even from the movie Roadhouse starring Patrick Swayze, just remember, be nice. It's just a job. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people tend to forget that, especially in a position of what they perceive to be authority, or in your case, a position of authority. Look, this is what my job is to be sure the neighborhood is safe. The community is safe. People are safe. It starts with you and me right now being sure this whole situation resolves peacefully. It may not have the outcome you want, but let's just go ahead and take one step at a time and be sure that we can arrive at the best possible solution in this moment. And a lot of times, when people find themselves, for instance, being pulled over for, a traffic violation, or as you said, called to the house, they tend to start doing irrational things thinking that they can escape or, get away with something. And I kept thinking of this particular chapter, which was toward the end of your book, that involved some suspicious people that were in a parking lot of an apartment inside of a car. I think it was called Nabbing a Most Wanted Criminal, to where people actually believe, because maybe they don't have identification, they can sort of lie their way out of who they are and kind of walk away clean. Let's go ahead and talk about that particular case, sir, if you can remember that one.
Sure. It was a group of young adults that was I was actually going to a warrant call where the individual wasn't there, but when I pulled into the parking lot, I saw a group of 4 young adults slumped down in a car in a parking lot. It looks like they were smoking something. And so after I cleared the warrant call, they pulled out of the parking lot right before me, so I got in my car and I found a reason to pull them over. I think they had a handicap placard hanging from the rearview mirror, so it was an obstructed view. And then I just began to talk to people in the car, and the stories didn't make sense. Their behavior was very erratic, and it appeared to me that they were using drugs. And I found that the driver had a suspended driver's license. And the more I talked to the people involved in the case, the deeper it went, because I was like talking about the young woman in the back who looked very young. I didn't even know she was an adult at the time. So I thought she was more of a juvenile. And they're like, oh, we don't know who that is. I'm like, how do you not know who's in your car? And why is she in your car? And so I went from being a traffic stop to inquire the behavior of the people involved to possibly having an endangered juvenile. And the more I went into the conversation, the more stories didn't make sense. And the more I would dig and talk to, so the mother of the driver was actually the registered owner of the vehicle. So I called her, and she gave me permission to search the vehicle, and I found drugs and paraphernalia. And so that led to a much more prolonged stop, and I was able to secure the identity of the two individuals in the front of the car. And the woman in the back that I thought was a juvenile, I couldn't get her identity. And she gave me a fake name and date of birth. So it came back no record, and it said she was like 24 or something like that. And the more I questioned her on her date of birth and everything else, it just wasn't making sense. And so what it finally came down to is I allowed her to start making phone calls while she's sitting on the curb while I was searching the car. And during that process, I could hear her talking to somebody, and I could hear one side of the conversation confirming the fact that she was lying to me about the current situation. And I heard her say she gave me her sister's date of birth, but she gave me a different name than her sister's name. And then in the search of the car, we found her driver's license in the car, and then she also had drugs on her. So then she also got attempting to influence a peace officer by giving false information to the to me to try and get down an arrest. So she awarded herself another felony charge, and I think she had 3 felony warrants already. But it was just the fact of my ability to talk and allow them some leniency to start talking, not even to myself, because they had no interest in speaking to me. And the other passenger in the back seat was cut loose because she was talking to another deputy, and she came back clear, no record. And when I was transporting the front passenger seat, the guy, to jail, I started up a conversation with him a week later when I arrested him again in a similar situation, because we routinely run into the same people over and again. And since I had a good rapport with him on that initial stop, what I always found to be true, when law enforcement has a negative interaction with people, that next interaction they occur with law enforcement is much worse. Well, I found with humane policing, how I presented myself, I would have a positive interaction with people, and the next time I interacted with them, it was even better. And he volunteered information. I'm like, well, who was the lady in the back of your car a week ago? And he told me who she was. He's like, yeah, she gave a fake name, and she had warrants for arrest. And so then I was able to catch her a few weeks later with additional felony charges of the giving false information to a peace officer. And so it's just the ability I had to talk to people and to get them talking, to make them feel comfortable, to allow me to do my job easier and more efficiently.
You know, and I think, too, for our listeners out there to understand is the fact that as I was reading a lot of your stories, there were a lot of cases where people were actually helping you to do your job. And I remember there was a particular time that you had responded where somebody had apparently was running from the law, and they ended up, I'm trying to remember totally what it was, but they ended up in a trailer home. And it turned out that they kind of ratted the guy out, said, yeah, he's actually back there in the back, and it was a situation that, you know, could have really turned very dangerous, actually. But the fact that, you know, here's a situation, you're at someone's home, and they're actually helping you get this guy out of there. Tell us about that one.
So that case kind of opened my eyes to myself about how different I approached the job than a lot of other people, because it was extremely eye-opening to me. And the people in the trailer, we believe they were producing methamphetamines and using kids to distribute. So lifelong criminals. So they had bad rapport with law enforcement, didn't want to deal with law enforcement. And I dealt with this lady about 2 months before this case. And she had a couple of young adults staying with her, and there was a domestic issue with the adults. And she told me that he was beating her, and showed me some pictures. And so I took the time to not only process the warrant issues that I had for the reason I was being there, and I took the time to talk to her, and I didn't show her any disrespect, no judgment. I didn't belittle her in any stretch of the imagination. I was just trying to do my job to the best of my ability. And because I had that positive interaction with this woman, because she was concerned about the younger lady involved in the domestic violence where I arrested the guy. And so she had respect for me because I followed through with what I said I was going to do in helping her address a situation that needed to be addressed. And 2 months down the road, it was a local police officer called me up. It was like 12:30 in the morning. And he's like, I know you have a good rapport with these individuals, and I've got good information that a individual with multiple felony warrants and a long criminal history is staying there and fled the scene of a hit-and-run accident and is staying in that residence. I said, sure, let's go talk to him. And this is almost 1 in the morning when we get there. And I knock on the door, and I said, yeah, it's Deputy Spencer. And they're like, yeah, okay, sure, yeah, we'll let you come in, Deputy Spencer. And when the couple opens the door, the first thing is the guy's in a sling. So I'm not even talking to him about why I'm there. I'm like, what did you do to your arm, man? Like, that looks painful. Mm-hmm. And he's just like, oh, I fell off the roof and, broke my arm. I'm like, wow, that sucks. And I said, well, here's the thing. I got good information that this guy's here. And they start to say, well, no, he's not here. And I said, just stop. I said, I know he was here 2 days ago. His car is out front. And that's when the guy kind of resigns to the fact of, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. He's not going to stop me. And he's like, okay, well, I'm just going to go over here. I'm like, okay, that's fine. And so the woman invites me into the house, and there's another couple sitting on the couch. And the other police officers outside the residence. And I'm curious to who this couple is because I don't know who they are. So I introduce myself and start talking to them. And the lady kind of leans into me and she asks me, are you here by yourself or do you have friends outside? I said, I've got friends outside if I need them. And she's like, okay, he's in the far bedroom. I said, okay. And that's when she commences to clear the couple out of my way. And then she gets a dog out of the bedroom that the guy's in. And to shorten it, I spent 30 minutes trying to talk this guy into cooperation. And I knew after 10 minutes, there's no way I was going to get him to cooperate. He was high on meth. He was completely edgy. And it was the one true sense in my career. I had a danger sense where I felt like somebody was wanting to hurt me. But I spent 30 minutes talking to this guy, and we ended up surrounding the trailer house, tasing him. But it got to the point where his friends, the owners of the trailer house, were yelling and cussing at him to get him to comply. And because they're like, look, you're not going to get this chance all night. And so ultimately we had to tase him. We had to take force custody of him. And then not only did we take custody of him, I cleared the call when the dangerous portion of the call was done where dispatch and stuff knew that law enforcement was safe. And then I went back to the lady and I said, will you give me permission to search that room? And since I had that positive interaction with her before, she voluntarily gave me permission to search her own house where that guy was staying. And that produced drugs, paraphernalia, weapons, and all because I took the time to treat her with respect a couple months before that. Even though that was her friend, and she knew I went above and beyond the call of duty to try and get him to cooperate because I didn't want to use force on him. I made that abundantly clear, and his own friends were arguing with me to get him to comply, to get him to cooperate with us so it could be a peaceful resolution. And it got to the point of the homeowner's like, you know what, kick down the door, do what you need to do because this is not going to end well. And I said, we'll take care of it however we feel we need to appropriately. But I went above and beyond, not for my benefit, not for my officer's benefit, not for the subject's benefit, because I knew 10 minutes in he wasn't going to cooperate. However, the people in that house, I needed to make it abundantly clear that I did everything I could do and more to try and gain cooperation. And that's when I get more charges. I take drugs off the street. I take weapons off the street because I took the extra distance and time to get to that resolution. And that's what humane policing is, and that's what I talk about in humane policing, how perspectives can influence our performance.
I know that as I'm on your website, humanepolicing.com, I noticed something that I think I would like to point out, especially in light of what's going on in the world today, especially here in the United States with the whole defund the police, movement and the idea that it's us against them. And on your website in 2017, the population of the United States of America was 325 million people, with law enforcement at about 850,000. Just yesterday, as I was doing an interview about racial inequality, I was talking about the fact that I think one of the biggest, to me, and I'm in the industry, criminals that are out there is the media and their portrayal of what seems to be going on versus what actually is going on, and the message and how it's actually interpreted. And I think one of the biggest hotbed topics, obviously, other than George Floyd, was the arrest and then the death of one Rayshard there in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's interesting that my wife and I, it was probably a couple of days just after this, that you go to YouTube and you actually watch the entire encounter. Now, I myself have faced the negative end of law enforcement, kind of a bad boy there, but most of the time it turned out pretty good because I was growing up just to simply, you just respect authority, do what you're told, and usually a better outcome is going to be had for you than it is if you decide to get nasty, as I was talking about in bartending earlier. And as I'm watching this whole thing, I said to myself, it's funny how they're turning this into a racial issue because of how things are today. But I said, it wouldn't matter what color or what race someone is. If they had done the exact same things that this individual did during this whole process, they probably would have found themselves in the same position. And and it's funny how when you see the interpretation, that, well, this guy got shot and killed by an officer simply by sleeping in his car. And I said, see, take a look at this. This message is totally changing here, and they're eliminating everything else in between. And it's pretty rough that you guys go out there when you think of 850,000 people on the police force for, 325 million people. And you're putting in 10 and 12 and 14 or who knows how many hours a day dealing with, as we were saying earlier, people who just, you're meeting them when they're having a bad day, and you can imagine what it must be like for these guys in inner cities enforcing law enforcement. And at times you just think to yourself, God, does humanity, can they just ever get it? Just behave, please. But how would you address something like that?
Well, the first thing I do when I talk to law enforcement agencies and citizens alike, I get them to look at something from a different angle. Because if you look at statistics in a different way, it'll open your eyes to what actually is going on and what is perceived to be going on and what special interest push that is going on. Now, let me explain that. Now, the racial component that everybody talks about is a racial bias in law enforcement. And what I would say is, sure, there are some individuals that are racially biased, bigots, racist, and you're not going to change those individuals. We need to weed them out of the profession to improve the profession as a whole. Okay, let's put that aside now. Now, if you look at what I believe the actual bias is I believe we have a socioeconomic bias. And what I mean by that is law enforcement treats poor people differently than they do middle class and upper class. And in 2014, the Prison Policy Initiative did a study of everybody incarcerated in prison. And the statistics are pretty overwhelming, where you have like 87% of men between 27 and 42, before they were incarcerated, were making less than $37,500 a year. 57% of them were at poverty level. And 72% of women in the same age group, regardless of ethnicity, were at 72% at poverty level, and another 13% were making less than $37,500. So that tells me that our criminal justice system treats poor people completely differently than they do middle class and upper class. And it has to do with education, single parent households, where they're just trying to put food on a table instead of endorsing education is very valuable to their kids. And then the cycle repeats. And everybody likes to talk about statistics. And the Washington Post did a database on people shot by law enforcement since Ferguson incident in Baltimore. And they break down and they say, yes, blacks are more disproportionately by population likely to be shot than whites, and Hispanics are more so than whites as well. Because they always put statistics per capita, per million of people. But whenever you watch the news, you never see poor white people being brutalized by law enforcement. Yet in their very own study, there was more white people killed than Hispanics and blacks combined. So there was 2,485. Okay, there should be outrage for police officers, brutalizing any nationality, not just black, not just Hispanic, it should be any. And that's where we need to change the narrative, because you have good cops leaving the profession now because it's so caustic of an environment. And back in 2007, when I was post-certified, there was 100 viable applicants to any one good position in Denver Metro. So you could be ultra selective about who you hired. There'd be no liability risk. It's a smart individual. They're going to think the way you want them to think. They're going to do what you need them to do. And now you have agencies with open positions. They can't put a qualified person in. So naturally, agencies have to hire individuals they would never hire in the past due to survival, just to fill a slot. And that you have further increased liability. You have people in the profession and in the agency that you would never want there before. And that's where this downward spiral has taken us. All because we want to look at a situation and a problem from a very narrow glance. And yes, minorities make up a large portion of this lower socioeconomic class. But they're not the whole socioeconomic class that we're biased toward. And if we change how we treat poor people in policing, then hopefully we can break more and more people out of that negative cycle to improve their lives, and then law enforcement can actually be appreciated and more people will get back into the industry.
It's like this whole defund the police there in New York City, and they managed to remove $1 billion out of their budget, and apparently, if it was possible, they would remove it all. And I'm thinking, well, how do you people expect to take care of yourselves? Because there's going to be a knee-jerk reaction at a time that you feel that you're in danger, where you think you can reach to call the police, but because you decided this other direction, you're on your own. And I don't know that people really understand or appreciate, the situation here in America and how unique it is compared to a lot of places in the world. And believe me, I've had encounters and for instance, South America, and it gets pretty scary down there, versus what we're talking about here today. And it's a much different world up here. And I think that we've become, or at least as a country, with these upcoming generations, so entitled to believe this stuff is always going to be there, that when it's not, boy, you better be ready. You better have a real solution if you decide you want to go down this road here.
And I couldn't agree with you more. The sense of entitlement in today's younger generations is crazy and absurd, and they don't put any judgment into repercussions of decisions they make. And when they talk about defunding, let's say you take the minimal approach of, let's say you're going to take away mental health calls from law enforcement. I don't know a law enforcement agency out there that would complain about that. They'd be like, absolutely, we don't want to take those calls. We're not trained for those calls. Because law enforcement has to be the jack of all trades. We have to be the psychologist, the financial planner. We have to be able to solve any and every problem in a very short time frame to help somebody move forward in their life. And the amount of burden that puts on law enforcement is crazy. And it sounds good, and it's a good soundbite of defund the police for these people, and I think that's the only reason they're saying it. Because let's theorize and say, okay, let's say social workers are going to take mental health calls, or doctors. And let's say there's a disparity in cost of individual servicing the call, and let's say the city saves some money that way. Okay, great. But who is going to protect that social worker? Are you going to then train social workers with the skill set to protect themselves and give them the authority to take that course of action? Because that's where it gets very complicated very quickly. Because every mental health call I went on was when the caregiver of the individual had lost their ability to control the situation and were desperate to have some other entity outside of themselves help with the problem. And a social worker isn't going to be able to calmly walk in and say, hey, will you please do this, sir or ma'am? Because if that was the case, the caregiver could have done it already. And, they're off their meds, they're self-medicating through meth or heroin. And they're not reasonable. They're not rational. And what we need to do is change our reactionary training, because the majority of reactionary training is shoot or don't shoot. And again, I go back to my own agency's policies, where they implemented a policy where I could not use less lethal force unless I had lethal cover. Well, if that's the case and I have to rush into one of these emergent calls without any backup, my only choice is my firearm, unless I choose to violate policy, which I violated my policy all the time, and I would articulate why I did it. But most people don't do that, and they're not trained that way. And if you get into a fight or flight mechanism with the officer, they're going to go to reactionary skills only, and that is shoot or don't shoot. Am I justified to shoot? Not should I shoot or should I not shoot? And what we need to do is corral situations better, slow down our response to a lot of mental health calls, and have less lethal already deployed and ready so that we can take another action to try and preserve life. And you won't see headlines like police officer shoots somebody with a screwdriver, or, I was hit with a chair once. But if I'd followed my agency's guidelines and rushed in, my options would have been to shoot this guy, which he outweighed me by 100 pounds. He was close to 300 pounds. And he was coming off methamphetamines. So we need to approach it from a different perspective of how can we achieve a better result without making it more difficult for the officers doing the job. And if somebody can come up with an alternative solution for social health workers or somebody else to deal with mental health issues, absolutely, I'm on board with that. And I guarantee you every agency across the country would be on board with it. The reason we don't have a solution is because it would cost even more than what they're doing with having law enforcement task it. And that is one of the main problems. And people fail to understand that. They're like, well, you just shouldn't be doing it that way. But most of the people criticizing law enforcement would never in their life even consider being in law enforcement. And when I was in the Marines, I learned early on, if you want to lead somebody by example, you never instruct somebody to do something you yourself would never do yourself, because that is the quickest way to break down respect and trust. So.
And that's a good point, because I remember having leadership roles and different careers that I was in, and generally how I also approached it as well was I would be doing a thing before I would ask somebody to do something else, because what I was asking them to do would be in line with the fact that they would know they were assisting me in what I was doing. Where you tend to see management and leaders, basically, as I like to call them, armchair dictators, go over and do this. And you're sitting there and you already create a resentment in somebody when, well, you're just sitting there on your butt and you're asking me to go over there and do this when you could be doing that yourself, sort of a thing. And so you begin to get that sort of resentment as well as disrespect after a while. And just like you're saying, well, if I'm out there and I'm showing them I'm doing this, leading by example, I'm going to get cooperation. And the whole theme of your book is simply just that. It's learning to get people to just simply cooperate. They don't want to, but they realize the end result's going to turn out a lot better than it would if they didn't.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the portraying theme, especially in going beyond the Call of Duty in Chapter 7, where I put myself in the person's shoes that I'm dealing with at the time, and I empathize with them and say, okay, how can I help you achieve a better result? And it's not so much of, and the biggest problem we have in law enforcement right now is started about a decade ago, and that's the warrior mentality training. And they train officers to be afraid of people they're dealing with. Well, if your human nature dictates that if I'm acting weird towards you because I've been trained that you're going to try and kill me because I'm talking to you, and as soon as I take a bladed stance to you, instinctively, in their mind, they're like, wow, this person's acting a little weird. Like, what's going on? And then that triggers a thought in the cop's mind, like, oh, well, they're starting to act weird. They're escalating this. When the whole time we just need to be able to talk to people better, because we should be the calm in the storm. I've gone into, I don't even know how many intense situations and say, whoa, let's back this off a second. Because when you have young officers like 21 to 26 going into calls with no life experiences and they're trained that they could die right then, it gets pretty intense for them pretty quick and they're pretty amped up. And I explain it like in my trainings, when you're in a dark room, you know, your eyes are adjusted. You can still kind of see everything that's in the room and kind of make out what's going on. And you can turn on the lights if you need to make things brighter. You can amp up that intensity. But if you go into a bright room and turn the lights off, you can't see anything. So you can't go in there intense and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. And it's really hard to back it off because things escalate so quickly. And so we need to go in there calmly and say, okay, as soon as we assess, which takes seconds, that there's no immediate risk or no imminent risk to life, and that's just scanning the room saying, okay, you know, nobody's trying to actively kill me right now. And say, okay. And that's what we say mentally. And if the next thought in our mind is, how am I going to help this individual? It completely changes the dialogue, and it completely changes the outcome and the options available to us that we can offer to the individual. And as soon as they see that empathy towards them, and even more so toward their family, that's when people actually listen. Because almost everybody I dealt with were logical and reasonable enough to understand a mistake was made and there's consequences for those actions. Almost everybody that has a complaint about officers isn't the act of being arrested. It's how they were arrested. And over the 90% of people that thanked me for arresting them, they weren't thanking me for the free ride to jail. They were thanking me for how I treated them and their family in the process.
Mm-hmm. You know, and I agree, because think about what you're seeing a lot of today. When you said about 10 years ago this changed, and it may have even been a little bit longer than that, is the idea that, again, back to, I want to point the finger at one of the bad guys, and that's the news media itself. Now, they don't really care one way or the other what the story is, as long as they have a story. And that's just all there is to it. And sometimes I get rather disgusted by the way they have went from producing news to producing opinion. And that's really what's bothered me the most about what I see out there. And the biggest thing is that, you know, well, now we're militarizing the police. Okay, so what? Now our own police officers are being turned against us. And yet you don't see and hear the full story, or you don't get out there and look around in the world and say, well, is this true? Well, you know, that's the other thing, too, is they just kind of take that perception, and that's the reality. So when they see a badge or a cop car, you know, it's a war before there's even an encounter, if there's even one in the first place.
And the problem is media sells what they believe sells, point blank. The community is demanding certain stories, so they produce certain stories. If you can change the public perception, media will have to follow suit, because that is then the popular story to sell. And they will entertain more viewers by selling what people want to see. And so if we can, you know, get rid of this divisive nature and actually bring our country together, I think the national media will then follow suit, because it's in their own best interest business-wise. And so right now they're reporting what people think they believe. And my whole mission is to improve the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. And I believe in doing so, it will not only make better communities, it'll bring appreciation back to law enforcement, and more people will want to get into law enforcement, because the vast, vast majority of people wanting to become law enforcement is because they want to help people. And we've got to get back to the service mentality of being a peace officer, serving the public and maintaining the peace. And it's just like you were talking about the bartender or waitress. And if you had somebody that gave you bad service or rude service, you wouldn't tip them, or you wouldn't tip them the same way you would tip somebody that gave you outstanding service. And what we need to do is tie back to the community law enforcement. We need to get rid of funding for law enforcement. Like, I'm not saying we decrease the budgets of law enforcement. I'm saying like traffic citations. I don't want that revenue going to the law enforcement agency. I want that revenue going back to improve schools, improve cities, improve roads, improve education, anything to build up the community. That way it'll break down the resentment of law enforcement thinking they're out to get them to bolster their own budgets. because it's an ulterior motive. Now, granted, to offset that income, you'll initially have to increase budgets of law enforcement, and you need more officers, not less, because we are so rushed on going from call to call because so many agencies are short-handed and under-budgeted that they can't give the proper service they need to because there's so many calls. And so we need to start addressing the actual problem to get to a desirable goal. We can't just say, oh, we're going to do this and it's going to magically improve. No, it's going to take time and sacrifice and focus to actually positively change the relationship between law enforcement and the community. It's going to take time and it's going to take money. And that's what people fail to understand because they hold these law enforcement individuals to a standard they wouldn't even hold themselves. And that's what needs to change so that law enforcement can then be the desired profession and desired goal to help people. And when you have the George Floyds and you have the it was the task force out of Baltimore that was essentially committing organized crime. When you have those incidents, you need to hold law enforcement accountable not only to the letter of the law, but you need to make an example of them because they're abusing their trust of the Constitution, their oath, and the people they serve. And what you need to do in Colorado, we have what we call enhancers. It's called position of trust crimes. So if a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a nurse violates somebody's laws, you can put an enhancer on there as a position of trust. And when we have blatant officers committing blatant offenses, absolutely, we do not need to plea bargain those cases. We need to set the example of when it's appropriate to set the example. Because right now they're saying any officer committing any crime should be held to the fullest extent of the law. Even we need to judge people for their intentions, not just the actions. Because you look at the SRO in Florida that failed to act in the active shooter in the school. Absolutely, he should be held accountable. His oath is to protect those kids, and he chose not to act. And that should be held worse than a officer taking an action with a good intention and having a bad outcome, because they're two completely different things. And that's what the community needs to understand, and that's why we need transparency in agencies to restore that trust, because the media has pushed a negative trust factor on law enforcement, making it much worse. And you've got almost 1 million sworn officers in the U.S. that the vast majority are good people trying to do good. And yet they take the brunt of expectations of these people that make the news, which typically isn't a typical interaction. And that's what we need to understand, and that's what needs to change.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's like I was talking about the case earlier of that one Rayshard Brooks and how they changed the whole story to be, well, he was just a guy asleep in his car. It's like, you know, if you watch the whole incident, believing that what we're seeing is true, is you actually hear the officer before he gets out of his car to go and engage him for the first time he asks him to move out of this drive-through that he fell asleep in, saying, you know, I really just don't want to deal with this guy right now. You know, I mean, you hear him say that. Like, all right, so let's go ahead and let's take care of it. Wakes him up, and then he says, you know, you really need to move out of the way here. And it almost seemed like he was just going to kind of let him go. And then he decides to fall back asleep again, you know, and then so you take one step after another, and then he calls in a DUI certified police officer. So now there's a reason for the second one, because this officer is certified in doing a DUI test to see if in fact this person's intoxicated. And you can clearly see this. Now, I myself, many, many years ago, was in that position. And I realized, well, you know, you shouldn't be drinking and driving. So I went along, and here's what the officer actually said in court. You know, this guy was completely pleasant and just was actually speaking as though I was almost the next Messiah, it seemed like. But I just knew, what good would it do me to have a negative attitude and to be nasty and make my situation even worse than it was? And the judge actually turned it into something like a diversion, which I could have, you know, been convicted. And I thought, geez, all that just for being nice. Can you imagine that? Pretty amazing that's what happens out there when you're just, okay, look, I screwed up. It's like one of my favorite Clint Eastwood movies is the movie called The Gauntlet. And there's a scene in there where he's in a hotel room with the girl that he's trying to take into police custody protection. And they're sitting there, and he says, when I was a kid, I used to hate cops. Clint Eastwood saying, he says, but as I got older, I got to understand what cops do. That you break the law, you get busted. It's as simple as that. And then after a while, he says, cops seem to be the only ones who actually, did something that meant anything. And it's just funny because he's actually facing a situation where there's a very corrupt chief of police in Phoenix, and realizes this is something I've got to stand up against. And so it's a pretty interesting movie in that respect. And it's the same thing here, that, like you said, we need to hold officers accountable when they're doing something intentionally wrong, and we need to actually examine things in a way where maybe things didn't go so right, but not hang everybody because maybe the outcome wasn't the way you thought it should be.
And one thing you touched on was the negative and positive behavior. And you said you were very positive in your interaction with law enforcement. And what I want to change, I spoke with several DAs on this aspect already, is I want a quantitative scale in all police reports to measure the cooperation of the individual. Because law enforcement historically has held people accountable for negative actions. Well, I also want the justice system to reward people for positive behavior. And so, you would exclude some violent crimes and sexual crimes and stuff like that. But on your normal incidents, let's say, it doesn't really matter what the crime is, but let's say you've got an individual that's extremely cooperative with law enforcement. Well, when they go in front of the district attorney, I want the cooperative individual to receive a better plea deal than the person that wasn't cooperative. Because right now, law enforcement only indicates, typically, is negative behavior of individuals where they're justifying uses of force or additional charges like resisting arrest. Most cops don't say, like, well, yeah, this person was completely cooperative and respectful, and he gave me all the information I needed, and, that should be rewarded. And so as soon as you start rewarding people in their own self-interest to cooperate with law enforcement, you're naturally going to have more cooperation with law enforcement. And that's what we need to work on, is different concepts and approaches, like what humane policing teaches, to get us to the goal of cooperation. And that will automatically begin to unite our country together and bring us back together instead of just casting blame and complaining about all these different problems. We need to address the problems and provide solutions and act on those solutions instead of just throwing up, oh, well, you did this and he did. What are we going to do to improve it and fix it? And that's what needs to change, and that's what I've been working on since 2016 after I became unable to continue as a law enforcement official on the street.
Well, first of all, on behalf of somebody who's been also at the bad end of police, thanks for what you actually have done, and all to all the officers out there, because I'll say more often the encounters with officers and civilians are really more positive than the media would lead you to believe. And, a quick example of that is I actually ran out of gas, and it was in Portland, Oregon on the Ross Island Bridge. It's 2 lanes going into the city and 2 lanes coming, out of it, east and west. And it was actually in the evening around 11 o'clock at night as I got off work. And if you've ever been on the Ross Island Bridge, it's a lot narrower than it sounds, even with 2 lanes going one way and 2 going the other. So there I am. I'm broke down, out of gas. I had a car come up, and I said, can I use your phone to go ahead and call roadside? Well, I did that, and while I'm waiting, trying to keep my car running, and then eventually, as far as, the lights and so forth, you're seeing these headlights come at you doing 45, 50 miles an hour, and you're wondering, do they actually see me? And the next thing I know, an officer shows up, and I explained to him what was going on, and he says, well, okay, cool, and so you got roadside service coming, I don't need to call anybody? And I said, no. And he says, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and hang out until they show up. He backs his car up a good 180 feet, I think it was. Lights full on, headlights on me, the whole bit. And I'll tell you, the 30 minutes before he showed up, I was sitting there wondering if I was going to end up in the hospital. know? And with him there, I was like, this is so cool. This guy could, in the city could have other things that he needs to go to, but he's sitting here making sure that I'm safe. And he didn't
Yeah.
bother to look for stuff about me or run my license, anything like that. He could have went through the car. He could, done a number of things that probably other people think police, but he didn't do any of that. He just said, I'm just going to make sure to sit here until they show up. And I was just like, you know, even though I had these other things I didn't like about how I put myself in those situations, in other words, taking responsibility for my actions that led me there, here was a
Hmm.
situation that was positive. And I've actually had a lot more positive encounters in those situations, where it becomes friendly. You get to know somebody, and it's pretty amazing. So when you see things like all this screaming about police reform, what irritates me about all these people, putting their faces on the camera, screaming police reform out in the streets, everything like that, I'll bet you, 10 to 1 odds that all these people, if you were to round them up, wouldn't even be involved in that process of reform. Well, we believe this should happen. We'll leave it up to somebody else to decide, and then we'll decide whether it's what we want.
Hmm.
And that really gets probably irritating for people on your end.
And I think that speaks to the entitlement we were talking about younger generations before. Because, yes, we absolutely need to hold law enforcement accountable and responsible for their actions. We also need to hold every individual accountable and responsible for their own actions, because it is also their actions that put them in situations that have negative outcomes. And I'm not blaming people for that, but we seem to overlook that, especially in the national media. And that's what needs to be addressed, where, yes, something bad happened, but how did we get there? How did we go from A to B to C to D to get there? And who all did what to get us there? And that's what we need to understand and fully highlight, because the more people hold individuals accountable for their own actions, it changes that perspective of the situation as well. And that's what needs to be addressed and because right now we're creating more of a divide between law enforcement and communities, a more us versus them mentality, and nobody benefits from that mentality. And you don't have officers going above and beyond because they're like, no, it's going to be a liability risk for me and my family. Why would I get involved? Why would I do that? And people would say, well, that's your job. And they're like, well, you can do the job then. And that's where people, if they're outspoken about police reform, absolutely. If they want police, they need to be the change. Join. If they don't want to become law enforcement themselves, go to take a civilian academy, do ride-alongs with agencies, get an insight where they can be informed about what actually law enforcement deals with, instead of that 30, 45-second clip they see on YouTube or Twitter, so that they won't be as judgmental of law enforcement about what situation they're in, because they don't even know the backstory of how they got there and what was going on prior to that. And that's what we need, is a better informed public and community, so they can make better informed decisions about what is actually right, what is actually wrong, what should be held accountable. And when you talk about defunding police, like in Minneapolis, what I don't understand, I reached out to the mayor a year ago, and he refused to meet with me. And that was after the Australian woman was killed.
Wow.
And so there was no approach there. After this incident occurred, I reached out to the mayor again. No response. I emailed 9 of the council members. No response. I called city council to see if they'd received my email. No response. I mailed books to the mayor, mailed books to the chief of police. So it's a matter of, you have people and entities that want to help and be a part of the conversation about positive change instead of a knee-jerk reaction to just placate people and say, yes, we need to get rid of this. Mm-hmm. Well, the problem is, if you don't have anything in place to what you're getting rid of, how are you going to control the streets? Cartels will take over. Street gangs will take over. They will see that opportunity and take it. Mm-hmm. Just like you had the extremist groups in the protests that were rioting. Mm-hmm. They had no interest in police reform. They were taking advantage of the situation to loot high-end stores. Point blank.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you remove that control, then those opportunists will move to that location to take advantage of that situation. And that's what people need to understand before they just say, we need to get rid of them. Okay, if you want to get rid of us, what is your solution? And that's where people need to think about the solution end instead of just saying, oh, we just need to get rid of stuff. Because getting rid of stuff is going to make things drastically worse than if we have an organized, thought-out plan to carry something out.
I know, just in closing here, too, I was showing my wife a video just recently, in fact, where it shows two officers standing there at their squad car watching an individual posting or spray painting Black Lives Matter and whatever else they were spraying on the side of the building. She says they're not doing anything, and I said, that's what I think is funny. Yeah, let's just see more officers doing that right now. You want to defund police? Okay, sure. And then see the, business owner come out and say, well, aren't you going to do anything about this? Well, no, you don't want us doing this anymore. So you do it. It's a crazy world we live in sometimes.
It is, and I could do a whole other session on riot control and riot prevention. That was my secondary MOS in the Marines.
Oh, right on. Well, Darren, thank you for taking the time to be on our program today. Again, the book is Humane Policing, How Perspectives Can Influence Our Performance, and your website is humanepolicing.com. People can find out more about that, and that's where they can also get your book as well as at amazon.com and the like.
Yes, it's available worldwide and on just about every place that sells books. But yeah, I appreciate the time, Daniel, and I appreciate having me on.
You betcha. You take care of yourself and keep up the good work.
Yep, let me know if there's anything I can do for you in the future.
Absolutely. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thanks for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.